Hello everybody, Dark Skeleton here, and with the advent of Standard Mode Hearthstone coming out a few months from now, I thought it would be a good idea to talk about some of the cards that are actually going to be leaving the game, at least in Standard Mode. You'll still be able to use them in Wild Mode, of course. Go down the list and give a couple comments on each of them. So here are 20 powerful cards that are going to be gone from Standard Mode in Hearthstone this year. This is, of course, in no particular order. Number 1, Loatheb. Loatheb's effect allows you to essentially lock down an enemy's ability to play spells on their turn. Yes, it's technically possible to play something like a Power Ward Shield, but if they're forced to use up that much mana just to do something on their turn, then Loatheb's effect has catastrophic results for your enemy. The fact that they're taking Loatheb out of Standard Mode means that spell-heavy decks are going to not have to deal with that threat anymore. This should be making Freeze Mages and Miracle Rogues celebrate. Number 2, Dr. Boom. How could he not make this list as one of the strongest cards in Hearthstone at the moment, simply due to the pure value you get by playing him on turn 7 for 9/9 worth of stats and 2 Death Rattle effects that deal 1 to 4 damage randomly. Dr. Boom exiting the meta is going to have significant results. In many decks that don't really play 7 cost or higher minions that have 7 attack or more and can be BGH'd, those deck lists still often play Dr. Boom currently, even though he has the weakness of Big Game Hunter. Once Dr. Boom is gone, I would say that you would either play a deck that has multiple 7 attack or more minions, or you don't play one at all. Remember that since Big Game Hunter is a classic card, we're still going to have him around for a long time to come. Number 3, Piloted Shredder. As one of the most durable 4-drop minions in the game, Piloted Shredder has just been an entire pain to deal with since his release. You can defeat his main body, but then more than likely a 3/2 is just going to pop out of it and have almost the same effect as if you had never touched the Shredder to begin with. Therefore, a lot of mid-range or tempo decks like to put Shredders in their deck because you can deal a lot of damage with it, and your opponent more than likely is going to need to be inefficient in actually removing it. Number 4, Haunted Creeper. In a similar vein to the Piloted Shredder, the Haunted Creeper is a difficult minion to deal with that has a lot of value packed into its Death Rattle. Yes, it may be a 1/2, but a 2-mana minion that Death Rattles into 2 more 1/1s has a lot of potential in decks that abuse having multiple minions on the field like a Zoo deck or Bloodlust Shaman, and has been a staple in many Hunter decks as well, simply because it's a tough to remove beast that can trigger kill command as well. Not to mention Knife Juggler. Number 5, Death's Bite. Considered by many to be the strongest weapon inside of Hearthstone, it's been used in decks from Grim Patron to Control Warriors to pretty much all warriors in general. The fact Death's Bite is going away means that warriors are pretty much going to have to choose from another option if they want to have the same amount of removal in their arsenal. This could mean resorting back to using an Arcanite Reaper or a Gorehowl, or to only have 2 Fiery War Axes in their deck. I personally think that when the new set comes out and Standard Mode is implemented, that they'll be adding a new warrior weapon in order to make up for Death's Bite exiting the meta. Number 6, Sludgebelcher. In a similar vein to how Piloted Shredder is tough to remove, Sludgebelcher is a great defensive card because it is also a taunt minion in both the main body and the Death Rattle slime. In many, if not most, control decks, Sludgebelcher has been a staple simply because of its ability to slow down the opponent and build up to that mana spot where a control deck can really start to take control of everything by throwing out something like a Light Bomb onto the field. Being unable to select Sludgebelcher will mean that pretty much all control decks are going to need to choose 2 other cards to play that defensive style and actually survive to the point where they can change the game. Number 7, Voidcaller. Several demon cards are actually quite difficult to play on their own right now, namely Ganis and Doomguard. A Doomguard, you would have to discard 2 cards from your hand unless you are playing very, very fast in a standard Zoo deck where you wouldn't play the Voidcaller anyway. But in those slower, more handlock or demon lock kinds of decks, you definitely currently want 2 Voidcallers in there so that you can bring out Ganis onto the field, normally 9 mana, and you can summon it for free, or a Doom Guard, which might be your third demon in that deck, where you get on the field as a 5/7 without having to pay the discard cost or the mana cost. Not having Voidcaller around is definitely going to be a hit on those more handlock style of warlocks that like to run demons. Number 8, Deathlord. Initially, this card was pretty much considered a joke by a lot of different people out there, simply because his death rattle effect can be so negative for you if you happen to summon your opponent who's playing, say, a control warrior, a free Ragnaros to the field. It can mean you lose the game instantly. However, Deathlord is actually really good at walling off aggro decks. If you buff it up with cards like Power Word Shield or Vellens Chosen, your opponent has to choose if they want to silence it, because if they silence it, that means it knocks it back down to a 2/8 for 3 mana, which is insane stats. But if they don't silence it, then they have to deal with a 4/12 or a 2/10, which is a lot of damage to go through. Furthermore, people figured out that you could actually use Deathlords in fatigue-style decks, or even a mill deck, where you force your opponent's deck to thin out by bringing those minions straight out onto the field, almost in the same vein as forcing your opponent to draw a card. And if you could clear that minion out for free because you were going to light bomb anyway, then all the better. Number 9, Mad Scientist. This card was the sole reason that secret-based mages became a thing after the release of Naxxramas. 3 mana secrets were just too slow to play for their mana cost, and the other cards that were supporting secrets were just too weak to make the cut. Now, this doesn't mean that secret decks are going to necessarily go away. Hunters can still play just fine without Mad Scientist in their deck. As I recall, the traps were included in those decks before Mad Scientist was around, like Freezing Trap for a mid-range hunter or Explosive Trap for a face hunter. And the mysterious Challenger Paladin that everybody either loves or hates right now doesn't even play Mad Scientist to begin with. It's just that one card bringing out 5 secrets, which is enough to make the 1 mana Paladin secrets actually viable. Number 10, Shade of Naxxramas. This card has been a staple in combo druid decks for a large time, partly because you can kind of cheese it out turn 1 or turn 2 if you happen to have a Wild Growth in your hand, or if you use Enervate, of course. And in addition to that, it's a card that you can keep stealthed until you're ready to play the combo for a lot of extra damage. So let's say you had a 6/6 stealthed Shade that your opponent just has no way of dealing with because it's been stealthed the whole game, and then you could basically combo and almost one-shot their whole face by having a Shade of Naxxramas plus Force of Nature plus Savage Roar. With Shade of Naxxramas leaving the meta, that means that druid decks are going to change a little bit, and we're going to be missing out on that semi-interesting mechanic where a minion can just grow until it's actually ready to do its thing. Though at the same time, it could be said that playing against a Shade of Naxxramas doesn't really have a lot of counterplay. You either have some AoE effect that manages to take it out, or you just have to deal with the fact it's going to grow until the opposing player is ready to make a reactive play. Number 10, Nubian Egg. Also fitting into that whole style of durable death rattle minions, getting a Nubian Egg out on the field and then being able to trigger it with, say, an Abusive Sergeant or Power Overwhelming has been a really strong play throughout Hearthstone ever since Naxxramas came out. Nubian Egg is one of the reasons that Zoo has continued to be a strong deck since the release of Hearthstone. But the card going away is also going to have an effect on any deck that tries to build the board with these minions your opponent doesn't want to remove, like a Bloodlust Shaman or a Egg Druid. Zombie Chow, considered to be the one drop you want to play if you want to control the board early on. The existence of Zombie Chow has allowed pretty much any control deck that wants it the ability to control the board early on and reduce the amount of damage that's coming in. It's a different style of control. Instead of playing super greedily by playing, let's say, 5 or 8, 7 drops or more, you would actually include some of these more early game cards that would counter specifically aggressive decks. Zombie Chow has really served its purpose, and as soon as Zombie Chow leaves the meta, there isn't going to be a obvious one drop that you would really want to play specifically for board control. Number 13, Ganis. Now, it could be said, and I almost left Ganis off the list, that you really need Voidcaller for Ganis to be amazing, because you don't often want to play him for 9 mana straight from your hand. That said, he's one of the more interesting minions in that he has multiple effects on one card. The first, of course, is to make your hero immune, and the other is to give your demons +2/+2. But with Voidcaller, being able to cheat a 9/7 body out on the field that also forces your opponent to deal with it before they can just nuke down your face really makes a difference in those handlock style decks. Furthermore, Ganis has good synergy with cards like Imp Gang Boss and Implosion, being able to buff those 1/1 imps up to 3/3s, which in some cases can just kind of win you the game if you get him out at the right time. I'm sure a lot of people are going to miss having the turtle in their arsenal. Number 14, Light Bomb. I didn't actually like the concept of Light Bomb at first because it also blows up your field to an extent, but Light Bomb is actually one of the most powerful removal cards inside of Hearthstone, especially when it comes to dealing with multiple creatures at once. The amount of removal that a Control Priest has right now is actually kind of absurd. You can play multiple Holy Novas, multiple Shadow Madnesses, multiple Excavated Evils, and 2 copies of Light Bomb if you want. But I would argue that modern control decks, like the Elise Priest, really rely on having that Light Bomb to ensure that they never get shut out of the game by an opponent putting on too much pressure. Without Light Bomb, Priests are going to have to look into other possible answers for dealing with massive boards that are put against them. Number 15, Antique Healbot. For a while, this was one of the reasons that late game decks were still able to be played when there were aggressive decks like Face Hunter out there, because healing yourself for 8 HP really made a huge difference in those matchups. You still see Healbot today in plenty of decks, especially in classes like Rogue that don't really have many other options for healing themselves, though maybe not quite to the same extent as before Reno Jackson came out. Still, Healbot has been quite an influential card, so it going away is going to change how the meta is played a bit. Number 16, Tinkerer's Sharpsword Oil. This is another card I actually underestimated a lot when it was originally announced, but if you're actually able to get the combo effect off, Tinkerer's Sharpsword Oil has a lot of damage potential that you can throw on the board. When playing against Oil Rogue decks, this is the one card, as the name of the deck would imply, that means that you can't afford to leave any minions on the board against a rogue who gets into the later turns, or you just risk pretty much dying immediately to getting stabbed in the face, a massive blade flurry, and the minion having 3 extra attack when he hits you for the finishing blow. Number 17, Goblin Blast Mage, and really all mech cards in general. Goblin Blast Mage was one of the cards that really made Mech Mage a viable playstyle, because you would have those mech synergy cards like your Mech Warper and the Annoyatron, setting up the board, getting strong early tempo, kind of similar to just general tempo mages are played actually. But then you throw on the Goblin Blast Mage's effect, dealing 4 randomly spread across the board damage, and you can quite easily shut down certain decks like a Face Hunter that maybe didn't think to remove your mech when they should have. But it's not just Goblin Blast Mage that's going away, it's also the Mech Warper, Annoyatron, Piloted Shredder, really most of the good mechs. So in this new standard format, it's not unreasonable to think that mechs are just going to kind of go away and phase out of existence, as most of the mechs were really released in Goblins vs. Gnomes. Number 18, Cog Hammer. This is a really influential card if you're able to play it on turn 3 on a board that you already have control of. For instance, if you have a Knife Juggler on the field, and turn 1 you played a Noble Sacrifice, and then you follow that up with a Cog Hammer, that is a really strong opener for Paladins. Having a weapon that not only removes your opponent's stuff, but also puts a Divine Shield on your minions so that the minion can make a trade for free, just means that basically Paladins, more often than not, are just going to secure the early game with these strong tempo cards. And number 19, speaking of really strong openers that Paladins can make, Muster for Battle. That was actually released in Goblins vs. Gnomes as well. Almost considered cancerous when you're able to combo it with a Knife Juggler, but Paladins, for the longest time, have had really strong early game, and Muster for Battle going away is going to dramatically impact how your more mid-range or early game Paladins are going to play, because that's a lot of power put into one 3-drop, and now it's just suddenly gone. Will decks like Mysterious Challenger Paladin still be viable after the loss of cards like Cog Hammer and Muster for Battle? Well, probably to some extent, but maybe Secrets Paladin won't be as big of a thing in the future, who knows? Finally, number 20, Vellens Chosen. This card allows you to take your really weak early game priest minions, such as the Northshire Cleric, and actually make them a threat that can take minions out on the board. A standard current priest wants to play Northshire Cleric, the Museum Curator, and maybe cards like Acolyte of Pain even. In certain decks I've seen it being a thing. And turning any 1-attack minion into a 3-attack minion on turn 3 really allows you to take control of the board, especially if they don't have a silence to follow that up with. In addition, the +1 spell damage is actually relevant if you're playing on turn 5 and you still have that minion on the board that was buffed with Vellens Chosen. A 3 damage Holy Nova is a big difference from a 2 damage Holy Nova. It's the difference between Grim Patrons being a real pain in the ass for you and them being completely negligible and being completely blown off the board with 1 spell. Without Vellens Chosen, I imagine more priests are going to have to either change the types of minions they play earlier on to have higher attack values, or just concede the early game and go back to your kind of Circle of Healing Arcanized Soul Priestess strategies. Alright, so that's my rough rundown of what I would argue are 20 of the most powerful cards that are being phased out of Hearthstone as soon as Standard Mode comes out in the future. Once again, note that you still can play with these cards if you are using the Wild Mode, which is basically what we have right now, Normal Mode and Ranked Mode, but in Standard Mode, which is what the official Hearthstone World Championships are going to be played, these cards are going to be gone. Are you sad to see any of these go, or are you more in the boat of good riddance, can't wait to see Dr. Boom and those other cards just vanish, never be seen again, and bring out some of the new stuff that's coming out in a few months? If you liked this video and want to see more like it, consider donating to my Patreon. I've been Dark Skeleton, thank you for watching, and I will see you in my next video.